Good evening, ladies and gents. Welcome to the third edition of Breaking the Binge Cycle with clinical psychologist Victoria. Victoria, how's it going?
Good, thank you. How are you, Jonno?
Fantastic, thanks. So in the first episode, we chatted about willpower. And what we showed you was that the reason your diets have failed in the past isn't because you don't have willpower or because you've been sticking to the wrong diet. It's more that a diet only deals with 20% of the problem, and the other 80% is related to the binge cycle. And then in the second episode, Victoria went deep into the other elements of the binge cycle. So curbing anxiety, dealing with emotional and physical cravings, and then looking at triggers that trigger the binge. But in this episode, Victoria is going to dive deep into the elements of worth and being thin to be worthy, and basically the shame and self-worth elements of the binge cycle. So just to recap, we looked at this, and what we addressed in the last 3 or 2 episodes was diffusing anxiety, identifying emotions and physical cravings, and removing or processing triggers to understand that they weren't necessarily calls to eat. And now we're going to look at redefining guilt and shame. So we're going to kick off with beauty culture, and we've got some adverts to show you, and Victoria is going to walk us through some of these ads. So Victoria, what I mean, this just looks like a really thin girl. This is on the tube station in London, and when people see this, they're like, oh, I need to get ready for summer. But what's wrong with this advert?
Well, so this is just a representation of so many adverts. I mean, this is on the tube station, but I mean, you can be driving, you'll see a billboard. When you're watching TV, even when you're watching YouTube, you get an advert that pops up everywhere. You're just bombarded with these messages. And I think what this is saying is that we have to look like this to be good enough, essentially. And another big problem with this advert is that this woman is probably like 1% of what women can actually achieve. This is sort of an exception to the rule of what women really look like. It's an unrealistic expectation. So it's 2 messages. You have to look like this to kind of be good enough and have fun and enjoy the beach. But also you have to have this unrealistic body type that most women can't achieve.
Yeah, like you shouldn't go to the beach unless you look like this, basically.
Yeah. And this is all about age. So we want people to look younger. It's much cooler to look younger. And so basically the message is we've got to fight the natural process of aging. We've got to stop that process from happening so that we can fit in again to an unrealistic standard of what we should look like. And it reminds me a lot of, I think when I see this advert, I think of cellulite.
Yes.
It's such a normal thing that happens to everybody's body, especially as you get older. Yet we are taught that cellulite's like the most disgusting thing that you can have on your body. And it's just, that's an example of complete shame attached to something that is so normal. This kind of advert, even though it's subtle, it says the same thing.
This is I forget the name, but it's something Carl's Jr.'s Burgers. So Carl's Jr. or Carl Jr.'s Burgers is like a huge burger brand in the States. Tell us about this ad.
Well, I think there's a lot of messages going on. I think this is directed to men, but because it's directed to men, the women looking at it are thinking this is what a man wants. And so there's this expectation again of what you should look like. And the idea that this woman is quite cool. She's eating a burger. She looks quite sexy. She's probably pretty confident. And so women want to be like this. And what makes this advert even more confusing is that she's eating a burger and she looks like this. So how does somebody kind of put those 2 things together? And then people want to strive to get to this place. So it becomes very confusing for people.
Yeah, the contrast there is what's showed up for me. It's like, I mean, this model who's in this photo, she must work really hard to look like that, let's be honest. Yeah. And so what it's telling women is like, you need to be perfect and and like food shouldn't be a problem for you. And you're like,
Yeah.
how?
And that's an expectation that men also then have. You know, you kind of hear that stereotype of like men like a woman that can eat a burger and eat ribs and not just salad.
Drink a beer. She drinks beer and she eats like a man. And
So we've got to strive to do that, but then at the same time, we're not meant to be eating those things. So, yeah.
Crazy.
And then essentially beauty culture, the message that we get through all of these different adverts is that being thin is kind of the answer to being a great human being. Someone who's thin has more control. Someone who's thin is more superior than people that are not thin. And so if we can be thin, it can be the answer to any insecurities we have, any struggles, any problems we have. And it goes past just physical appearance. We attach this to, if I want to be successful in my job, I need to be thin. So we start putting things together, associating this with things that are not even true. I think, this slide.
So these are some of those examples you're talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. So if I was thinner, I'll have more friends. People will like me more. I'd be more disciplined. There's this idea that if you're thin, it means you have some kind of control. People that are overweight feel ashamed that people can see that they don't have any control. That's the perception. People will like me more. This is a sad one. I would deserve a relationship. So just based on my outer appearance, I'm more deserving. And this has nothing to do with a person's like personality and the things they like and what they do. It's all based on this idea of thin. If I'm thin, there would be nothing wrong with me, and I'd feel like I have achieved something. So all of these things are actually not associated with being thin, but yet it's there. Yeah.
The crazy thing that we've experienced is we have a lot of people who've had kids and careers. So like a lot of working moms. So and I don't know why this expectation is now like women need to work and they need to be the mother. And like dads still just sit on the sidelines watching women like work their asses off. But like we have women who've given their lives to their career and raising their kids and like running the home and looking after their husbands. And they still feel like all of those achievements don't matter because they're overweight. And that's like the biggest failure that overshadows everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So sad,
And so many women also spend, just like you're talking about, so much time preoccupied with this goal of being thin, and they've gotten some number from somewhere that they're working towards, and they just spend all their time and energy on that, and to the, they compromise other parts of their life.
Yeah, and so tell us how this sort of permeates through social media, because most of us are glued to our screens, all day, every day. What kind of messaging does that bring across?
Yeah, so I think this world of social media is really, so many people present themselves in a certain way, which is not really realistic and true of what's going on. So again, we're getting all these messages of this unrealistic way that we should be. And then on top of that, we're posting things. So we're not just seeing it, but we're posting photos or whatever it is. And we wait for likes and we wait for people to comment. And for lots of people, but I think young people as well, this starts to become like the gauge of their self-esteem and self-worth. If they're doing well in the world of social media, it means that they're good enough. It becomes the reality. But it isn't reality, obviously. It's like a false reality. And so you have all these people building a sense of self-worth on something that's not real. And that's obviously very problematic.
Yeah, the next slide, as a father, like this really got me. I have a young daughter, she's 6. And this is crazy. I didn't even know this was a thing, but selfie dysmorphia. What is selfie dysmorphia?
Yeah, so this is a thing that's quite recent. And basically, well, it's not just women, it's also men. They are getting plastic surgery. So they're actually changing their bodies to look more like their selfie picture, because that is becoming a representation of who they are. So it's things like having higher cheekbones, a smaller chin, bigger eyes. Generally, things are much brighter. These colors that are not really, your hair might not actually be that bright blonde. So they are trying to become the idea of themselves that is their selfie, and getting surgery for it, which is just mind-blowing that this is happening.
So they use a filter to represent themselves differently,
Yes.
and then they start to like associate with a filter more than they do with themselves, and then long to look more like their filter than themselves, and actually get surgery to do that. That is like, I actually didn't. That is nuts. I'm horrified.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're so scary.
So hectic. That's so hectic. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So I wanted to chat about extreme dieting. So obviously, like my experience of this is that women often come to Real Meal when they've fed up and tried everything. And I think like even when you get to diet 10, you're fed up and you've tried everything, you still try another one. And so we have this exercise at Real Meal called the study of one, where we try and learn all the lessons, or we document all the lessons we've learned from diets over the years. And what you do is you write down every single diet you've been on, and then you go through and you take all the positives out. So what did I learn? You know, what worked, what didn't work, etc. And in this exercise, I've had women who were like in their 40s and they had done more than 30 diets. And if you've done more than 30 diets, that's like one diet a year from the age of 10, or that's more diets than years. In other words, like more than one diet per year from like your 20s. And that is like, that was a real shock to me. And so these are just a few examples of the desperate measures people take to lose weight. In the 80s or the 70s, it was like tapeworms, which I don't know, it didn't last, but still prominent is like the juicing diet and these fat burning pills and endless calorie counting. I mean, like all of these things cost a ton of money. They take a ton of time, and I don't think any of them yield lasting results. But it is a symptom of what you were talking about earlier, this beauty culture, and it's, I think it's desperately sad, I think, to see. Yeah. So, but why? Okay, we talk about why, and I know this is from Brené Brown, and it talks about like what the world expects from women. So maybe you want to just tell us a little bit about that.
So, there's this expectation that we've kind of talked about it a little bit, that women have to be a certain way, but yet they also shouldn't be too much of that way. So a woman should be honest, they should be confident, say what's on their mind, they should be well educated, passionate, all of these things, but they shouldn't be too confident that they know it all. They shouldn't be too straightforward. They still got to kind of stay back, stay a little bit in the shadows, not be so loud. And similarly, it's not on the slide, but with weight, what the expectation is, women should be smaller and petite and not as recognized and not as seen. So it's kind of this like discrepancy of we are expected to be something. It means that we're doing well, but we should also not be that thing. So it's terribly difficult. It's like this gray zone that is very hard to be in.
Yeah. No, so in summary, it's like, be brilliant, knowledgeable, correct in every way possible, but like actually don't be any of those things. So it's like,
exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine a mother who is old school, like giving this message to her children. We need you to be confident.
Yeah.
You need to be hardworking. And then when the child's confident, it's like, you mustn't don't raise your voice or share your opinion. People don't want to see that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the message is then given to the children and it's passed on. Not through the person's, fault of their own, but through how they've grown up and what they've learned about the world as well, all the messages they've received. But it gets passed on.
So this leads to shame.
Yeah, that gray area that I was talking about is it's a hard place to be. You don't really know how you should be, and then you don't feel good enough when you're not the thing you should be, even though it's impossible to get there. So living with this idea of just never enough, I think, captures what shame feels like sometimes, and just not being good enough. And then I think kind of the world sort of, because we expect these things from women, women feel exposed when they can't get it right. So they feel like people can see that they're failing at doing what they're meant to be doing. And an example of that is being like a mother. It's not good enough if you're a stay-at-home mother. It's not good enough if you're a working mother. It's not good enough if you're doing both. There's kind of no place to be. And I went to a dinner party the other night, and it was a bunch of my friends, and the way that everyone greeted each other, it was so crazy. I was just watching, and they said to each other, "Oh wow, you're looking so skinny," and then the other person would say, "No man, I'm so fat actually, you're looking so skinny." And that is how they judged each other.
Yeah,
so
life's going well for you, you are thin.
There's this constant judgment all the time. So look perfect, do perfect, be perfect, and anything less than that is shaming. So
I can echo the weight equals good thing in the way, like I've seen my wife and her mates all get together. It's the same thing, but also the experience of a mother being judged for not doing one or the other. So like a stay-at-home mom, God, like how boring can your life be? You should go out and get a job. And then a working mother is like, sure, your kids are really going to struggle without you. There isn't like a win. And then if you're part-time, it's like, oh, she's just all over the place.
Yeah.
It's so hectic. So this leads to self-objectification theory, or maybe not leads to, but this is another piece of the puzzle that really stumps women now. Tell us about it.
This is a really incredible theory that I came across, and it just made so much sense for me. And when I've spoken to women about this, it makes a lot of sense for them, that we take on what we are expected to take on without knowing that we're doing it. So we treat ourselves according to an external evaluation of what we should look like, these unrealistic beauty standards. Without knowing it, we do it to ourselves. So those adverts, we're talking about beauty culture. Unfortunately, we internalize all of that and we treat ourselves that way. So despite capabilities and things that we're good at, we still think our weight and what we look like is the most important thing, according to what other people are going to think. And it's like many women have spoken about this experience. You can walk into a room and you can be educated and whatever else and confident about yourself, but you'll compare yourself to everyone in the room and check out who's the heaviest, who's the thinnest, where do I stand in this room? And that's how you judge yourself in that situation.
Sure.
So we take on that, which is a crazy thing. So this is the cycle. This is the cycle. So we strive for these unrealistic standards of beauty, which are called health, often in the media, which are not really health. We attempt to get to these places, and this comes from a place of shame, guilt, not feeling good enough. We're then unsuccessful, of course, because these things are unrealistic. And then this is just evidence that we're not good enough, which again makes us feel shame, guilt, unworthy, not good enough. And so we start all over again and try and strive for those things. And so the cycle just continues, and people can just be doing this their whole lives without recognizing that they are actually doing it.
So now that's great. So thanks for unpacking that. And as I said in the beginning, in the previous two workshops, we looked at this binge cycle and explained how this is actually the real cause of this endless war with weight. And then in workshop 2, you discussed how we diffuse anxiety and identify, emotions, and kind of how connection is really the thing that combines or brings it all together and gives us ease and relief from anxiety. And you've explained how shame and guilt and like sort of negative self-worth are caused. But now you're going to tell us a little bit about how or what we can do to really like redefine shame and guilt and actually troubleshoot that. Because obviously if we remove anxiety, cravings, and triggers from the process, as well as shame and guilt, then there isn't anything pushing us to restrict or to binge. Then we just operate at neutral and we can focus on nourishment.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first step you said is something to do with expectations and outcomes.
Yeah. So we've got to redesign our own expectations of who we want to be in the world, not what the world wants us to be. So this is looking at what our values are, what type of people we want to be, what living in integrity looks like for us. We have to design that. We can't internalize that outer voice of the world anymore. It has to come from us. And And you can see here what happens is the expectation is too much. We can't get there. And so there's a lot of disappointment. So we want to minimize this. We want to make expectations realistic, things that we can actually do, so we can actually achieve these things. And that's going to help a lot with shame and the experience of shame.
Okay, so if you had to reduce the expectations, say like down to here, you would expect what you get. And then even though you wouldn't necessarily achieve this outcome, it was never realistic anyway. So the only thing your expectations are doing are robbing you of the joy you would get from what you are actually achieving.
Yeah.
And that would be the frustration you experience in this chunk here.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Exercise positive self-talk. So what does that look like to you? What is, I mean, not the slide. I mean, this slide got me in the field, by the way. But what does exercising positive self-talk actually look like? And what is the point of it?
So the best way I can explain this is talking to yourself like you would talk to a friend. And if you can notice how you speak to yourself, you might be quite horrified at some of the things you say to yourself and how cruel and shaming we are to ourselves. So really learning to catch that negative self-talk and that shaming self-talk, like that cycle of self-objectification, like learning to get out of that in your own head. And treating yourself much better. So a huge part of that is a lot of compassion and being much kinder and gentler to yourself. And then there's specific techniques that you can start to use within this positive self-talk. But the main thing is really compassion. Yeah.
So there is just one curveball question here, which is something everyone's going to come up with. And they say, yeah, sure, I'd be compassionate with myself if I would just do better. Like, in other words, like I don't deserve compassion. So what do you say to someone seeing this? Because they'd be like, because they say, oh, okay, some people can talk positive to themselves, but I definitely don't deserve that kind of sympathy or compassion.
Well, that's where I think starting off with your expectations of yourself is the starting point. So understanding what you're trying to achieve and why will be really important, because you can then see when I'm not doing this thing, when I'm not achieving it, what's actually going on here. This is not just about me being useless, being stupid, not good enough. So you can kind of logically understand it a bit better when you start at the starting point.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then building resilience. So tell us what resilience is in this context and how we cultivate that.
So yeah, this is Brené Brown's shame resilience theory. And it's really all about talking about shame something that we do we do it on a daily basis. We understand it. Shame doesn't have to be this big, scary, ugly thing that catches us and then we can't cope. So the first step of it is recognizing triggers around shame. So knowing, okay, right now I am having a shame experience, and then not acting in a way that makes that worse. So an example of this is, say, someone at work humiliates you or says something really mean to you in front of all your colleagues. That would be like a shaming experience. So instead of getting up, running away and binging, you recognize, okay, this is what's going on for me and I need to deal with it differently, and having a plan of what to do differently. So it's basically like reducing the harm that comes from that experience and understanding what it feels like. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But resilience feels like sounds like a word that makes you super tough. So how does it make you tough?
Well, so that's the first step. Then the next step is understanding external factors that might be at play. So not necessarily making everything about you and what you're doing wrong. So knowing that if you did have a binge, had a hard day at work, my friend left cookies in the fridge, a whole bunch of factors that happened that led to this moment. And it's not about making an excuse for behavior. It's about understanding behavior. And that's where compassion comes in. Yes. And then with that, the next step is then connecting with other people and sharing the experience and talking about it and receiving empathy from others. Someone saying, I totally understand why you would do that. And let's talk about getting back on track, or whatever the case is. And that is the like defense against shame, is empathy, because that's all about connection. It's the opposite of shame, which is feeling powerless. It's feeling isolated. Empathy kind of takes that all away. And that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I just want to hammer down on that as well, because you mentioned it so many times, and I've seen it in real life where there is shame, and we don't talk about the things we're ashamed of because we think it'll make it worse and people will judge us. And the irony or the paradox there is that talking about things you're ashamed of actually makes the shame go away, which is totally counterintuitive. But I've seen it happen. Amazing. Okay, and then the final step.
Which is what
shame.
What you're talking about is speaking about it. It becomes more like your everyday language. It's not this big scary word. And then what's quite important here is understanding the difference between shame and guilt. Feeling guilty about something is a bit of a message that, okay, I shouldn't do this thing. I made a mistake here. Whereas shame is like, I am the mistake. I am the failure. So understanding guilt a little bit better means it can help you. It can help you change your behavior. So that's important.
Yeah, very, very powerful stuff. And then at the end of the day, like I would say the number one thing, I do throw a number one thing around quite a lot, but in this context, like I think it's really important. Like self-worth is like this, it's the killer. Like if you have done everything that you can to really transform your health, the thing that'll get you back to unhealthy or trip you back to like put on all the weight you've lost, it is self-worth. Like I'm not worthy of these results. And this shows up all the time. And so this diagram explains it a little bit. Maybe you could just touch on what self-worth is and how we can actually cultivate it.
So self-worth is feeling good enough, feeling worthy of love in all situations, no matter what's going on around you. You know, it's normal to have a bad day and not feel so good. But self-worth is no matter what happens, I am a deserving human being. That's what self-worth is. And if you have a healthy self-worth, it means that even if you put on weight or even if you're not at the weight you want to be, you're still going to have a sense that you're okay as a human. You're not going to be striving for these unrealistic standards of beauty. Basically, it's going to help with that whole thing. And really to develop self-worth, a lot of people say, you know, you just got to believe in yourself and all of those things. And that's lovely. But actually what it is when your values, which you will come up with yourself, meet with your actions. Because every single time you behave in a way that goes against your values, that chips away at self-worth. That doesn't feel good. And that can happen in the smallest ways. Just if you make a decision to eat something, even when you're not hungry, that can kind of chip away at feeling okay with yourself. So when your values and your actions align, it increases self-worth. And we often actually haven't sat and thought about what our values are and what's important to us. They're actually not really aligned with what's good for us. So, and I love that. I love how it goes together and then the two overlap.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, the reason I love it as well is because people do think like, you know, because I mean, even in conversations at Real Meal through both of our workshops, we've said, you know, the key is to you know, decide on what you value and then just act in alignment with your values. And then, yeah, like you said, believe in yourself. And I think like self-belief it starts off as self-doubt. And it's something that you have to prove to yourself over time. Yeah. But you won't take an action unless you believe you can do that action. So it's like you can want to believe that you can achieve a goal, but you actually only believe that you can take one step. So for example, like I want to believe I could run a 100-mile race, but I don't necessarily believe I can do that yet. What I do believe is I can run like 10 Ks. And so then I go out and run 10 Ks and then that gives me feedback and it's like, okay, like you've got that, you can do that. Exactly. And then so you only really believe you can do like the main thing when you're like 2 or 3 steps away. But you have to have proven that you could get that far by like continuously taking an action, and that gives you feedback and builds that self-belief. and at the same time building the self-worth. So it isn't it's deliberately a step-by-step process, not just like I believe and then all my problems have gone away.
And the amazing thing about what you're saying is those little steps can be really, really tiny, like the smallest of things that you can achieve, and just that is the beginning point of taking the next steps. And you feel instantly better. You don't have to arrive at the end to feel good. Like you can, even when that circle moves just a tiny bit closer, it's like, hey, I feel so much better now than I did yesterday. And I think people wait too long to get to the end before enjoying like where they're at. So you've nailed it. Okay, we've discussed redefining guilt and shame, and that's how it works. So to summarize, you have to change your expectations, and obviously if you lower your expectations, you will achieve what you expect, which makes you feel good. Then build resilience by like being more vulnerable, talking about what's going on for you. I'm right. And I feel like I missed a step there, but then building self-worth slowly and understanding that it's a process and that your beliefs and your values and your actions don't just all of a sudden line up, but they slowly build together to develop self-worth and self-belief. And if you're doing that, if you take all 3 steps that we've discussed today and then the other 2 workshops, you completely destroy the binge cycle. And then you can just focus on eating healthy foods. And another thing is, if you do get into the cycle, or you somehow in one part of it for whatever reason, you have the tools to get out of it. So it may not be that it's completely gone forever, but certainly it's so much more manageable and easier to control.
Awesome. So thank you for watching, but it's not over, because we have. So firstly, we have you are not weak. You can definitely experience joy without food, and it's in the form of connection, which is what we all truly crave. And you are worthy, and there's nothing you need to do to be worthy. You're worthy for waking up in the morning. But this is an opportunity for us to tell you about why we have done this. And so we have an eating psychology transformation program that Victoria has written in partnership with Real Meal Revolution. And this is just one testimonial from someone who has done it. And she said she spent 3 decades, 30 years, losing weight and then putting on double or triple that weight, using every diet from cabbage soup to weekly weigh-in clubs and everything in between. After only 3 weeks of the eating psychology or the psychology of eating program, I've gained more insight into the patterns sustaining that behavior than I have in the preceding 30 years. For the first time, I have hope and excitement for the future, all wrapped in a huge dollop of gratitude. And best of all, I've lost 15 kilos. Now, a disclaimer, I don't think she lost 15 kilos in 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Because she was actually on one of our other programs before she started. But that is a profound testimonial. And so if you are interested in exploring this further, working with Victoria and peers in a controlled and safe space to discuss the kind of things that we've been talking about, check out the links. I think it'll either be below this video or above this video. There will be links to find out more information about the eating psychology online transformation program in partnership with Victoria, the super shrink. Victoria, how are you enjoying the program?
I'm loving it. It's been so amazing to see how people interact, to see people's experiences. It's been really, really incredible. And I've learned so much through the experience as well. Yeah. It's
kind of the culmination of your experience in, because you worked in addiction, you've worked with eating disorders, and now really like focusing on eating psychology. I imagine it's quite exciting to see your work really being digested, if you'll excuse the pun.
Yeah, it's great. And I think what makes this program really special is that people are coming together and talking about what's going on. It's not just a live presentation, it's an interaction. And all the things we've spoken about in these 3 episodes are happening in the course itself. It's really incredible.
Well, it's awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And for those of you, thank you very much for watching this series. Please click on the link to find out more about the program, and hopefully we'll see you in a workshop soon. Thanks so much.